Hey, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll get started now. I'm Cheryl Barnes, Director of Digital Learning and Residential Education in the Office of Open Learning. Together with the Office of the Vice Chancellor, we coordinate this event each year. It's great to see you all here. It's a great honor and a pleasure to have Professor Melissa Nobles, MIT's Chancellor and Professor of Political Science, here to open the festival. As Chancellor, she oversees all aspects of undergraduate and graduate student life and learning. Due to a busy schedule this morning, Chancellor Nobles can only stay with us for a few minutes, but we're delighted to have her here now. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to her. The floor is yours, Chancellor Nobles.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here with you for this 5th annual Festival of Learning. This event, as you all know, is about teaching and learning innovations and reimagining an MIT education. We aim to celebrate and inspire one another with the transformations and experiments happening in this space, and to keep MIT at the forefront of what I often refer to as educating the whole student. And what do I mean when I say educating the whole student? In certain ways, this won't surprise you all, but this comes very deeply from my experiences first serving as SHAS Dean. And I think the hallmarks are these. 1, to have students prioritize their own and others' well-being. 2, to encourage students to feel like they belong and help others feel the same way. To help students make sure that they are open to different points of views and experiences, and who celebrate diversity in all of its forms. And students who see their stake in humanity and who are engaged, purposeful citizens. The times that we are living in, from the pandemic to climate change, to social justice, to technology's role in the spread of misinformation, demand that we equip our students with the scientific, the technological, and humanistic tools that they need to understand the world around them so that they can make it better. Today, you will be hearing from the thinkers at the forefront of really reinventing education, the innovators, who, as the theme for this year's festival suggests, are, quote, realizing the promise of our new normal education at MIT. They are keeping the best of the innovations developed during the COVID period, amplifying them, renewing them, and deepening our commitment to better serving a diverse student population and driving ongoing improvements. It's really incredibly exciting and important aspect of our work here in the Chancellor's Office, the deepening the meaning of an MIT education, and to deepen also our commitment to educating the whole student. As Cheryl mentioned, I wish I can't stay, but I wish I would be able to. And I do have another commitment this morning, but it was important for me to be here to help kick things off and to acknowledge the critical work that you all are doing. So I thank you for that. I'm now going to pass it back to Krishna, who will offer here a few reflections on the as the festival's first panel begins.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you from all of us. Let me start with a few thank yous, and in addition to thanking Melissa, I want to thank Ian Waits and his colleagues in the Office of the Vice Chancellor, who are our colleagues in pulling this event together, especially Janet Rankin, Ruth Ann Thomas, who will be co-host of the panels. Cheryl just says I have an echo. Is that right? Is everyone hearing an echo? I can switch microphone. Is this better right now? I just switched microphones. Okay, so I've just removed my good microphone and I'm using my laptop microphone, but this is better. Interesting. Okay, so let me start again. So thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much. And I want to also start with a few other thank yous, thanking Ian and the Office of the Vice Chancellor, and in particular, Janet Rankin and Ruth Ann Thomas, who will be hosting one of the panels today and who have played a key role in pulling this all together. Let me also thank my own colleagues from the Office of Open Learning, and in particular, the Digital Learning and Residential Education team. It has been my real distinct privilege to work side by side with all of them for the past 4.5 years. I'm specifically going to call out Cheryl, whom you've just heard from, Aaron Kessler, who will be hosting one of the panels also, and Molly Ruggles, who invisibly behind the scenes makes everything happen. It's now my pleasure to join Melissa in kicking off this wonderful celebration of teaching and learning. Those of you who have just named make happen in one sense, but really this is a celebration of what thousands of people, literally, around MIT have worked so hard at for the past 2 years. And I'm talking about teachers and learners. And as we have all rethought and reinvented how we teach and learn of necessity the past 2 years, I think we all know that there's much there that we hope soon to forget. But at the same time, all of us have been finding things that we've learned how to do that we didn't know we could, and realized that are really good elements of the new normal that we're all looking forward to taking further steps into this spring. Earlier this week, I had a conversation with a colleague, and that colleague said that we put so much thought, and he emphasized thought, so much discussion into how our students learn and how we teach when we were all remote, that he felt actually that in his career, he had thought through his teaching much better during the pandemic than he'd ever had any other time in his career. And I think he's not the only one who feels that way. And his conclusion was that given how much thought he had put into, he'd figured things out better and more from first principles in the pandemic than previously. And so there was this and this and this, which he told me, but I won't tell you, but this and this and this that he was going to keep doing in the new normal. So from our panelists today, we're going to hear their examples of their this and their this and their this. And I want to urge all of you to think of your own. What are the things that you saw during the pandemic that made a positive impact on student learning in a really difficult time, and that are prompting you to think about how to change your pedagogical or curricular teaching practices or curriculum in the new normal that we are all very much looking forward to experiencing. Let me also say, before I hand off to Aaron, who will host the first panel, that in very much this spirit and following a direct recommendation from Task Force 2021, which Melissa played a leadership role in, and I and many others here participated in. And I'll make a side remark, by the way, those of you who haven't yet read the recommendations of Task Force 21, you will find in those recommendations a lot of wind in the chancellor's sails. When the chancellor speaks about educating the whole student, there's a lot of wind in those sails in that report, but that's not what I'm speaking about here. Following a different recommendation from Task Force 2021, Janet Rankin and I are co-chairing a committee that is in fact gathering examples of what I've just been speaking of. We have consulted broadly through departments, but we haven't reached out to every individual at MIT. And we have heard many examples, but we'd like to hear more. So please connect with either Janet or me with your own examples from your curricular modifications, your pedagogical improvements that you see as keepers for the new normal. Not the how did you survive question, but what are you doing? What are you changing for your future, your part of the new normal? Today, we're all going to learn from 6 great panelists. Janet's and my committee will be taking notes. This will be input to our committee, more further input. But from the rich suite of examples that we already have at hand from many, many people who have already given us input, we know that we can learn an enormous amount from listening to each other, like we will today. And our committee's aim is to distill, shape, and then share observations of best practices with the whole community after we've heard from many of you. So please reach out to us, and that's what we are trying to do. So now onward to today's festival. It's a celebration of teaching and learning. It's a celebration of what we have learned over the past 2 years. And really, it's a toast to ourselves as we take our first steps into a new normal this spring. As we hear today about the ways in which all of us can follow the examples from the panelists, make that new normal even better when it comes to the learning opportunities for our students. Aaron, I'll leave it there and pass it on to you. Aaron Kessler will be introducing and hosting our first panel.
Thank you, Krishna and Chancellor Nobles. It's an honor to get to receive the baton from the two of you and start the process of sharing out some of the amazing work of our colleagues and faculties from across the Institute. As Krishna sort of alluded to, the transition to remote and then the deployment of sort of Canvas as our university-wide learning management system, and now the return to campus has created this unique moment in time and set of opportunities for faculty, instructors, course teams, and even students to consider how they utilize educational technologies in service of sort of the student experience, the courses in which they're in, and the instructional needs of the Institute widely. Our panelists today have all in their own ways integrated a number of different tools and techniques with sort of those course structures in mind. And I'm thrilled they have all agreed to be part of today's session. I know there's a lot going on this time of year, so a big, huge thank you for the time and energy you've put into thinking about what you want to say today and the work that you're doing to support your students. That goes for the panel I'm hosting and all of the people who are here today. In terms of the structure of the panel, each of our panelists excuse me, will begin by explaining a bit about the work that they've been doing in their specific course, some of the key tools they've been utilizing. And after each person has an opportunity to present a bit, we'll take some specific questions for each of them. You should feel free to write those questions in the chat. We'll find those, circle those through and ask them as we're able. Finally, all three panelists and I will come back together to sort of open the discussion at the end. First up, we have Mauricio Karchmer. Mauricio is a lecturer in ECS and here representing the course team for 6006, Introduction to Algorithms. That course team has been using Canvas with integrations from Gradescope, Piazza, and others. So Mauricio, thank you so much for coming today. I share the screen with you and welcome your sort of introduction and comments.
I wasn't sure exactly what to talk about. 6006, let me start with an introduction to the class. It's one of the foundation courses in Course 6. It's taken every term by 350 students or so, sometimes 300, sometimes 400. So it's one of the big classes, you know, in the Institute. It has a big staff. You know, usually we are 3 instructors presenting. We have about 10, 11 TA slots, 4 or 5 LA slots, and a bunch of graders that helps us with grading the assignments. So, you know, 6006 to me as the main administrator is as much to take care of the students as to manage the staff, which I think of it as a small company. So a few initial remarks. You know, without tools, it would be almost impossible to manage a large class such as 6006, right? On the other hand, with the tools, we can scale this up. So, you know, when students ask me for permission to enroll, thinking that there is limited enrollment, there isn't, because we have the tools and it's really just a matter of getting a larger classroom or more staff, right? And by more staff, I mean more TAs, more graders, and so on and so forth. So, you know, tools give us the ability to scale. Also, because of these tools, it was relatively easy to go remote when we had to go remote. Okay, so we were really prepared, not because we knew that there was a pandemic coming, but because we were using the tools before. Now, sometimes we overuse the tools, and I will talk about this in a second when I talk about Canvas in particular. And this is not because of the tool, but because of a little bit of the culture at MIT on the students' part that maybe will change with time. However, even as we use all these tools, we really haven't changed that much how we teach the class. So we've incorporated some of the ideas that we started doing during the pandemic, and we are continuing with those. But by and large, we haven't changed that much how we teach the class. So in that sense, my remarks will be a little bit boring. So this is, you know, we use a lot of tools and technology. We use Canvas, Piazza, Gradescope. We use the lightweight lecture capture facility. We use Catsup, which is, I will talk about in a second if you guys probably don't know what it is. But we also use a lot of other technology like Slack, Google Sheets, GitHub, Google Forms, and things like that. This is mainly to coordinate among staff, to coordinate tasks, to persist content, and to conduct student surveys and so on and so forth. And we use a facility called FireMe that one of our TAs wrote a few terms ago to host virtual office hours. This was very useful, obviously, during the pandemic, and it's not clear how much we're going to use it going forward, because at the end, in office hours, we want to form a bit of community, if possible, among students. So we'd rather host office hours in person. So I want to talk about each of these tools, gives a little bit of pros and cons of each one, and then give some final remarks. So Canvas, right? So Canvas is our main course site. We use it to give to make student announcements, as a document repository to release problem sets, handouts, and so on and so forth. We also use it to administer weekly mini quizzes. These weekly mini quizzes are, we started doing them during the pandemic when we wanted to make sure that students remain engaged. So after every couple of lectures on a weekly basis, we will have a mini quiz, which was just a 4 or 5 multiple choice questions, just to make sure that the students were attending or watching the lectures. But this is something that I think has survived the pandemic, because now we are using it not to make sure that students are attending and watching lectures, but also to emphasize some of the key concepts in the lectures. So when we don't know whether the students fully capture a given concept, we ask a question in the mini quiz just to make sure that the message was out there. So this is something that survived the pandemic. And we use it also to calculate grades and so on and so forth. Now, this is something that we could use with LMOD, the precursor to, not the precursor, the system we were using before, moving to Canvas. But with Canvas, we also try to organize the material into modules. We maintain the calendar of lectures and due dates, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the flexibility that Canvas gives us, we use. And this is something that we spend a lot of time maintaining and doing. So a lot of, especially at the beginning of the term. So a bit of pros of Canvas. So it's reasonably straightforward. Once you get the idea of the system, it's reasonably straightforward. It's nice that more and more classes are adopting it, because if we maintain a calendar of the class and every student has all their classes in Canvas, then they have a unified calendar. So it's nice, right? It has good integration with Gradescope, which is the system to grade assignments. It has okay integration with WebSys, good enough, but it could be perfect. It could be better. It's nice that every TA can maintain its own page to communicate with its own section, and all of our TAs use this facility. And it has a great help desk, right? So the learning curve is relatively simple, given that you can ask a question and they're very good at answering it. Some of the cons is that it's a pain to roll a class from one term to the next. So every beginning of the term, I spend many hours rolling the class, because you have to change dates, and sometimes you make some modifications, and it's a little bit of a pain. Also, not all classes have adopted it, so students sometimes, they have to manage and learn a lot of systems. And a lot of its functionality is not really applicable to a large class like 6006. I think Canvas was designed more for smaller classes which are more participatory.
Mauricio, about 2 minutes.
Okay. A few pet peeves. Students are students, and they do not read handouts, they do not familiarize themselves with Canvas, etc. So it is really not important how you organize information, because students many times will just ask a question on email rather than go through the site. So it's not clear to me how much effort, if it's worth all the effort we put in maintaining the site. Hopefully, as more classes adopt Canvas and the culture changes among students, this will go away. Great scope. I don't have time to talk about. Piazza is our billboard. I think a lot of classes use it, and it's key to facilitate student Q&As, and especially when students answer each other's questions. So the LWC is the lightweight capture facility that we have in our classroom. So it allows us to record our lectures, and it supports students that do not attend lecture. And a lot of students don't attend lecture. This is a large class. And not only because they may have to be in isolation or they are sick, a lot of our students cannot focus on a large class, right? So this is something that I want to talk. I don't have that much time, so I want to go straight to the final remarks. So it would be a real pain to manage the class without the tools, right? But we could do it, except for two, right? So if I could only use two of the tools, I would keep Piazza and the lightweight capture facility. So Piazza, because really it's very important to give students the ability to ask questions and be able to respond to them with outside of office hours. I mean, students have just too many questions. And lightweight, the capture facility for lectures, again, in big classes, it is not really feasible to assume that that all students can benefit from lectures in a big lecture hall, right? A lot of students just cannot focus on a large lecture hall. A lot of students have to be able to pause, rewatch, and so on and so forth. So I'm very, very happy that due to the pandemic, the institutes invested in these facilities and offer it to us as instructors, because prior to the pandemic, this capability was not in as many classrooms as it is now. And these are my remarks.
No, thank you for sharing some of your thoughts and the sort of overall structure of the course. I've been fortunate enough to get a chance to see a little bit of sort of the behind the scenes of the way your Canvas courses sort of integrated all of these tools, and I think you're underselling how wonderful a job you and your course team have done in making sure that the integrations are seamless for the students, that they are all there, that it is all in one place, that the due dates are structured in a way that students can see it on their calendar and quickly access the Piazza or the Great Scope submission or these other pieces. So I think your course team deserves a lot of credit for making sure that all of those pieces are together.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And as I said, we spend a lot of time every term rolling the class from one term to the other. What you are not seeing is all the emails during the term that students ask us, and how do we, where do we find the lecture recordings, and how do we ask for an extension, and so all information that is out there in Canvas or in handouts and so on and so forth.
Sure. Mauricio, I wanted to, Paul Mendy ask a really interesting question that I think you may be able to shed some light on, right? So this distinction, maybe relationship trade-off between Canvas discussions versus Piazza. You mentioned you really value Piazza. I'm curious to hear if you have any ideas, if you've explored the Canvas discussion as an option. Oh, I think you're muted.
I've looked at it, but it seems to me that students are just very familiar with Piazza and will resist any move away from Piazza. So, we don't use these discussions as part of the grade. I have thought about it, and in many cases I would love to be able to use things like that for the grade, because students complain a lot about our grade policies that are largely due to based on exams. And I think that having discussions or things like that may allow students to show what they know in different ways, but we haven't done that.
Thank you so much for sharing about 6006 today. We'll circle back and invite you back to the larger discussion here in a little bit. At the moment, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Emma Teng, who is here to share her experience with 21G042, Three Kingdoms from History to Fiction, Comic, Film, and Game, which sounds awesome. Basically, today she will talk about her work with Canvas, with a new app, Perusal, and the Canvas App Seed Fund process that brought Perusal sort of into the fold for her and her department. So Professor Teng, I hand it off to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll start my screen share. And while I'm doing that, I just want to say that I'm really honored to be part of this panel. So thank you so much for inviting me. So can you all see my slides well? So I'm going to talk very briefly today about the Perusal, as Aaron mentioned, which is a social annotation platform, and now have integrated with Canvas. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm going to share a little bit about how I used it in my class 21G042, which was taught as a special subject last spring, completely remote. So first part was setting up the assignments. First thing I really like about this tool is that it's really easy to add very diverse file types, as you can see from the examples on this side. And this was really important for this particular class because we are comparing a lot of different media. So you can see from this assignment that I gave them, they're reading a literary text, a historical text, and also watching some TV episodes. And so Perusal gives us the ability to create a single assignment that has all those media within it, and for students to annotate those. The second part I really liked about setting up assignments, you can see from this example, is I was able to use the annotation tool in the side to add an illustration into our first chapter. And that helped us in our goal of comparing images with texts, but also restores something of a more original reading context for the student, because this is a Qing Dynasty illustration that's not in their translation, but this way they're able to see those side by side. The other tool I liked in here was the bookmark tool, which allowed me to bookmark all the chapters so that students could easily find those as they needed to. The other function that I really enjoyed using, again, this is sort of setting up the assignments in advance, was sort of preceding my discussion questions of the text into the annotations. And you can see here I'm ET, so I added some questions, and then students began to respond to those as they were reading. This was the second feature that I really like about Perusal. There's a range of different annotation types that students can use, not just putting their comments or annotations in texts, but also, being able to have links to images or videos. And some of the students quite enjoyed using the emoji. So moving on from setting up the assignments was a process that I call reading together. So this is before we came to class, but we're reading the text together. And again, I had preceded some of the questions into the text or some of the points of the text that I wanted to highlight. And students were really readily able to contribute to those and get the conversation going before we even came to class. And they were also able to ask questions that I could respond to in real time. Here you can see they had a question about the snakes that were referred to in the text and the different symbolism, because there were white snakes and green snakes, and students were rather curious about the symbolism. I was easily able to upload a picture of this particular species of snake that's referred to in the text and explain some of the color symbolism in Chinese culture. So this was an aspect of really fostering conversation outside of our class time. The third feature I really like about Perusal, well, some might like it and some, hated it, I think, is the notifications allowed for timely response. So I believe you could shut that off. But what I really enjoyed during this remote semester in particular was getting pinged immediately when students had a question when they were reading the text. And it allowed me, when I had time, to, reply right away to them or in a timely fashion so that they could get that information. This is a second example I want to show you of how they were able to annotate images. So we looked already at annotating text, and annotating images really allowed them to kind of hone their skills at close reading of the images. And here, I think I really enjoyed this comment that a student had. I think this depiction shows a great job of stressing the regret of this main character. So that was something that came out in the text, but the student really honed in on how the artist was depicting this visually, and you see that I upvoted that comment. And here again, this allowed students to annotate the images to bring out their comparative reading of text and image. And it supported our objective of being able to compare the novel with the comic book adaptations. So this way, the tool really helped our learning objectives. In-class exercises, our breakout rooms, was another way that I found Perusal really easy to use. And here's an example of how we were able to annotate some of the video text. So I had set up 5 different clips for an in-class exercise, and again, sort of preceded the clips with certain discussion questions that I had for them. I gave the students into pairs in their breakout room with about 5 minutes to look at the clip and respond to that, and then we came back together for the discussion. Another part was preparing for class discussion. I found this tool, again, really supported that. I was able to go through most of their comments. I can't say I got through all of them because sometimes there was, 400 comments on the text, but you can use either the star feature or the bookmark feature to set up ahead of time which ones you want to focus on in class. Hashtags are a fourth feature that I really like about Perusal. Having these hashtags allowed us to, and I asked the students to annotate as they went along, use, for example, hashtag Confucian, so that we could trace this theme throughout the semester. And then, sort of halfway through the semester, we could look back and see how it featured in the novel. This I enjoyed as well. Students came up with their own hashtags. One of the students noticed that it was quite interesting that some of the martial arts heroes frequently cried. I hadn't noticed this because it's a very normal part of Chinese literary history, but it was unusual to the students, and they began to annotate with hashtag crying. So students are able to bring their own concerns as well. The confusion report is also a very helpful feature that allows you to prepare for class. You can look in the confusion report and see what kinds of questions that students had about the text and make sure that those get answered in class. Another very useful part of the tool is what I call the pulse check or the analytics. So there's a lot of analytics here that you can see. The average reading time, for example, for the assignment, that helps you see as you go along to make sure you're staying within the targeted homework assigned, you're not overloading students. Confusion report, I've already mentioned that. And then the analytics allows you to really drill down. For example, you can choose this annotation submission time heat map, so I can sort of see what time students are doing their homework, right? Whether it's like right before class or in the middle of the night. And the analytics also allow you to see the most upvoted annotations for that particular class, and also the most active students in terms of who had the most comments on that particular week's assignment. And that was a fifth thing I really liked about this tool, the analytics. I did not use them for grading, I should tell you that, but they really allowed me to facilitate in-term and also post-term adjustments, right? To see, did I give them too much homework, or perhaps maybe not enough, and I could give them supplemental assignments, just to check in on how things were going.
About
so the
2
benefits.
minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm coming to the summary of the benefits. enabled us to annotate a wide range of texts, images, and videos within a single application. It was a place to provide cultural notes for the students. It really fostered interaction and engagement among the students, facilitated students asking the instructor questions, facilitated my preparation for class discussion. It eliminated the awkward silence problem in class because you didn't come to class kind of cold to talk about it. There were already comments in the text that I could point to launch the discussion for that day. And it facilitated participation for shy students. Some of them didn't really want to speak up a lot in the class, but they were quite active in the annotations. The analytics enabled me to do the pulse check and adjust the workload. And in terms of student responses, just very quickly, I had done a poll. Mostly, they really enjoyed this tool. I won't go into the comments now, you can ask me later, but in general, they really liked Perusal. And they did suggest we keep it for an in-person class. So to conclude, how did we get this Canvas integration for Perusal? It was part of the Canvas external app seed funds process last year, which you can read about in Canvas. And I'm really happy to say that Global Languages was able to get quite a few apps through the seed fund process. Flipgrid was enabled for the whole institute. And we were also able to get ThingLink internally for Global Languages as a kind of pilot. And I guess we'll see how that goes as to whether that can be expanded to other units next year. So please apply. I think the next round of these seed fund applications will be due maybe in March or April. I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure Cheryl or Aaron will let you know more about that. And then I will conclude my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A great presentation of a sort of newer tool that not a lot of people might be aware of. Cheryl has included a link to the Spring application and info for the external apps. So that's in the chat if you're interested. A few questions, and actually one that popped in my head as well, which was, if you can say a little bit about how you're imagining this transitioning back to the sort of on-campus instruction. So I think I can imagine how you're thinking about where this might go, but I'm curious if you can share a little bit about what your hopes are for using the tool this coming term potentially.
Yes, I'm going to be really interested in the outcome of using the tool this term because it was really a perfect tool for remote instruction, right? Because we're interacting through this interface of the computer screen. It was also a very small class. We only had 9 students plus 2 auditors because it was a special subject taught for the first time. I've noticed from pre-registration numbers that there's probably about 25 students this time, so it's significantly larger, and we will be in person. So it's going to be quite different, and I'm interested to see how that goes. I envision probably following pretty much the same process I outlined of setting up the assignments, reading together, and then the class discussion. And I'll probably try to project this up on the large screen in the classroom. And maybe students are going to also follow along on their laptops. So we'll need to see how that goes.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is the purpose of I think in the way that you described it is, it was a way to sort of build community. It was a way for them to interact. It was a way for them to see one another's post in the context of the learning representation, whether that be video or image. And so the question becomes, you mentioned that it could be a lot of comments, and with only 9 students, that was a big part of it. Is there, if you were scaling this potentially, if you were thinking about what this might look like for a larger class, do you think part of it might be that you break up or sort of support students in focusing on their annotation, or do you think you would still potentially leave it open, knowing that it will just be a large number, and that's sort of the way in which you need to engage?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaron. If I can maybe just think about how I might do that. I'll probably see how it goes, but initially maybe having the whole class just work together on the text and comment together. But there is a way to create groups. So I could think about doing that if it felt, too overwhelming. Of course, the downside with groups is it might be arbitrary who you group students with. And I know one thing that we really benefited from last year was there happened to be one student who had a very, very strong background in Chinese poetry. So she was always adding a lot of commentary on that. And the students really appreciated what she brought to the class through that. So there's always a risk when you have smaller groups that might get a little bit fragmented.
Perfect, thank you. And the idea of the functionality, knowing there's a functionality of being able to put groups in place so that you can sort of pare down the number of annotations that may appear to the student is really helpful. I can imagine that being overwhelming for them if they enter in and there's already 400 annotations in a document as they're starting their process. So that's interesting. We'll circle back and thank you for presenting. At the moment, we're gonna move on and I wanna double check. Joey, are you here?
I'm here. I don't see Martin.
Martin yet. Okay, so I want to welcome, Professor Martin Bazant will be joining us shortly. He's coming from a talk that he's giving at a international conference at the moment. So we will look forward to him joining us when he can. But joining him in the conversation today is digital learning scientist and lecturer Joey Gu from chemical engineering. Collectively, they're here to talk about their work in 1050 analysis of transport phenomena. They're here to share a bit about their experience with Canvas, much like our other colleagues, but also residential MITx and the experience with Lightboard Studios. So Joey, I hand it over to you. Thanks for joining us and the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Can everyone see the slides? Okay, so as Aaron was saying, today, Professor Bazant and I would like to talk about our use of basically what we created as a massive open online course, 1050X, in our residential teaching. So just to set the background a little bit, 1050 is one of our core chemi graduate subjects. So when the graduate students come into chemical engineering, in their first semester, they take 3 of the core subjects, and 1050 is one of them. This is really our graduate applied mathematics course for graduate students. And we go over some of these topics listed here. So we created this MOOC back in fall 2018. We actually launched 2 separate MOOCs over the years. We've run the 2 parts of the course several times. And we have a large community of online learners, about 12,000 MOOC learners. That's compared to about 50 students per semester at MIT. So the MOOC was, I would say, quite successful. We, 1050.1x won the MIT X Prize in 2019 and was the finalist for the edX Prize. And we've created just a large amount of course content. So that includes Lightboard videos. You see some screenshots here, and a lot of MITx problems. So it's a fantastic collection of content, but the question is, how do we use it in residential teaching? And that's a question we've been pondering for the past few years, and I believe we're converging to some steady state, and I'm happy to share that with you. So just to go over the content that we have, so if we look at the Lightboard videos, so we have great facility on campus for recording these nice looking polished videos. And this is what the workflow looks like. So, so Professor Bazant is the instructor for 1050X, would begin by drafting what's gonna go on the board, just on his tablet, usually in this PDF format. And then we go into the Lightboard Studio. We can refer to this content on a computer screen, and then we do the live capture, right? So, and then we end up with video footages. Sometimes, invariably, we make mistakes, maybe in writing down the equations, maybe as we're going through the derivation, we find something isn't explained super well, so we re-record, right? So there's some editing that goes into making sure the videos come out polished in a way that kind of make sense for the students. And this is what we usually observe. The videos that come out of Lightboard typically tend to be more polished than in-person lectures, right? There are fewer mistakes, things are probably explained more succinctly, right? And the videos end up being shorter than the lectures themselves. And sometimes complex calculations, which we just do on blackboards, will end up in several videos that are shrink together. And then, I will just mention in passing that there's the option of adding multimedia and potentially creating these clean screenshots of the board work if we so desire. So that's one aspect of the course. We have so many videos. How do we use them? I'll get to that. So the second aspect of the content we created is just a large number of MITx problems. So keep in mind, these are problems designed for the massive open online course. So the key philosophy here is it useful for formative learning, right? Is it really a tool that the students can use, the online MOOC learners can use on their own to study the content, learn new concepts, test their learning, and then maybe brush up on things that they've learned in the video lectures. So there's a large variety of different types. So from simple multiple choice and drop down, which are quite effective for assessing conceptual things, but also, this is a graduate class with a lot of math, right? So sort of one innovation we have was just thinking about ways for students to more intuitively input complex equations. So in our case, that could be, for example, an ordinary differential equation, right? So, we can create custom Python graded problems where students can input sort of more advanced mathematical symbols and notations that are not supported by conventional edX problems. There's also adaptive hinting, right? So the student inputs an answer and it's not quite the right answer, but sort of along the right lines. We can programmatically tell the students what's right, what's wrong, what you might want to think about a little more, right, to get to the right answer. So that's one aspect. One other thing that we think is super important for learning is to have detailed solutions, right? Again, thinking about MOOC learners, although there is a discussion forum and some TA support, right? It's much more helpful, I would say, for MOOC learners to have these detailed solutions. So if they repeatedly get a problem wrong, or they just cannot get the problem at all, right? At least there's a detailed set of solutions they can refer to for their learning, right? And students have always commented on how much they appreciate the detailed solution where they can just learn everything and make sure they understand the solution steps, especially in these complex problems. So there's all a scaffolding for these problems, right? So for one problem, we call what we call one problem in 1050 will end up being 10 or 12 edX problems, where we really take the students through the step of the solution, but also thinking about not sort of giving everything away, right? It's not just you pull the crank, you do this, you do that, right? It's more a mix of conceptual checks and mathematical calculations. So we really make sure the students understand the rationale behind the solution, but also giving them the opportunity to practice math. And of course, being MITx, there's all the fantastic opportunity of creating nice graphics and even animated plots of functions, things that are interactive, just all sorts of fantastic tools and opportunities for especially teaching these STEM subjects. So finally, I'll get to sort of the core of what I wanted to talk about, which is how do we use this massive amount of material for our residential teaching? So I will, so we began obviously implementing some of these changes in 2020 when, it was fully remote and we sort of had to even refer the students to some of the lecture videos for learning, right? But in 2021, we were teaching back on campus. So then we were asking ourselves, how do we reuse the video content? So what we ended up doing was relying heavily on Canvas as our learning management system, right? So that's really where the students go to see what's happening this week, where are the lecture notes. So we just went right back to giving all in-person lectures as in previous semesters, right? But we started to use MITx more like a resource. So the same way we use our conventional textbooks. So this is a textbook that we have used, written by one of the former instructors for this class, Professor Bill Dean. So we just decided MITx needs to be this other resource that we use in our teaching. So it's kind of in the same way, right? So we would assign reading in the textbook chapters. So in the same sense, we could assign videos for students to watch after each lecture. So these are, in a sense, optional or supplemental, right? Because they're kind of repeating what we did in the lecture, but students often find it helpful if they miss a lecture, right? There's these nice polished Lightboard videos they can refer to, or if there's something that they just found confusing or didn't quite follow in class, right? They can go right to the right video and watch it, maybe at a slower speed or with the ability to pause. So that was the feature students appreciate.
2 minutes, Joey.
Okay, thank you. So that's how we use the videos. The problems was what we thought was very interesting, right? So we began assigning MITx problems as homework problems. So instead of going to the textbook problems, which was sort of what we did traditionally, right? We have this relatively brief problem description, right? And students would really struggle on their own and sometimes with their peers to solve the problems. There's not a lot of feedback, right? And students would submit their solutions, and then 2 weeks later they get the feedback from the graders. By that point, we've already moved on to like 5 chapters ahead. So students don't get that real-time feedback that they get from MITx problems. So this turned out to be what students really appreciated. They like having both traditional textbook problems, but also these MITx problems, where they get real-time feedback, but also can solve the detailed solutions for their learning. So students reported, just finding these problems a great tool for sort of a stepping stone for fully independent problem solving, right? Where there's a bit of hand holding and scaffolding in these problems, but also sort of students often tell me, yes, although there's a lot of scaffolding, Joey, the problems are not easy at all. Sometimes, we also spend a lot of time on these problems, but they do report they learn from that process, which we're really happy to hear about. But, it's sort of in summary, right, it's really Canvas is a one-stop shop for putting everything together. And then we just simply link out to MITx, right? Where we, whether it's a homework problem or whether it's supplemental reading, we just link out as URLs. So nothing fancy, but also this kind of keeps the two sites separate, because you can imagine MITx by itself can be used as a learning management system, which we're not using it in that way here, right? So linking it out wherever necessary, that's how we use MITx. So that'll be all.
Thanks, Joey. I really appreciate you sharing that information. I've got, just to give some info to the people, can you say a little bit more about the process of working in the Lightboard Studio, and whether, you mentioned that in the framework of the MOOC, but I think, for example, I know Peter Damashkin will be talking as part of the second panel. I know they use it for their residential, but can you talk a little bit about the sort of where the Lightboard is and sort of setting that up and where you go to record those videos?
Sure. So I would say Jim Kane is really helpful in getting anyone up to speed on what Lightboard is and how to use it. So Jim Kane is a member of the residential MIT team. So the studio we use, I believe there's several on campus now, but the one we always use is 26069. So it's this is kind of a view of what inside of the studio looks like. So there is this piece of glass, right, where you can write on, but then we take the mirror image of that, and that turns out to be these nice videos. And there's another workstation somewhere else where we can sort of control the capture. So it's relatively easy to use. You can have someone assisting you, where you can do it all by yourself. There are buttons you can click behind the screen to begin and stop capturing. So it's all very easy to use, and you end up with these nice polished looking videos.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey. And one other question I sort of had is, as you think about how you're going to continue to leverage these things, these resources moving forward, I'm curious if you've given any thought to sort of reimagining the way that the lecture time works. Given that you've got these videos, given that you've got these other pieces, is there any consideration of sort of coming back to and reorganizing the course structure residentially for the next round, now that you've figured out how to like better integrate these two pieces and sort of the content side?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Aaron. That's something we're still pondering. Yeah, I think you're getting at things like flipped classroom or blended learning. So I would say the kind of feedback we get from students is they really do appreciate the lecture times. The conventional lectures, just go into a classroom, watching instructors writing things on the blackboard. That is something students do still appreciate, right? So in 2020, we went fully remote. All the lectures, almost all the lectures were replaced by these whiteboard videos. I think students, in that year particularly missed the opportunity to interact with an instructor in real time, ask questions, sort of have a discussion, sort of see how their peers are doing, right? Are they equally confused? Is everyone struggling to write something down? I think students appreciated that. So that's why we decided to keep the classroom component in 2021. Now, are there certain things that are more effectively taught in this video format than in person? I think that's something we should continue to investigate. But I do believe a sort of a model of sort of using different kinds of resources differently, sort of according to what we hear from students, according to what students like, what they don't like, right? Making these incremental changes from semester to semester. That's probably something we will do.
No, that's great. Thank you, Joey, and for sharing this. And I'll note to the larger community, Professor Bazant and Joey have sort of really enjoyed their Lightboard uses, to the point where I believe you've sort of carved out space within the chemical engineering department to create your own Lightboard space, and to sort of take more advantage of those pieces. So congratulations to all of you. I want to bring everyone sort of back together and sort of really ask sort of maybe some broad level questions. And one of them is really this, you've all, and Martin has joined in. Thank you.
Everyone, sorry, I was just in the Netherlands, actually, which is where I was supposed to be today, giving a talk on COVID, actually, transmission, and unfortunately, just couldn't get here quicker. But thankfully, I'm sure Joey did a great job. I just joined.
He definitely did, and we're glad you can make it back from the Netherlands so quickly. This is the upside of these events now.
Yes, I can be in 2 continents at once. Yeah.
We very much appreciate you joining. So one of the things that I have for the panel as a whole is, I guess you've all mentioned the tools that sort of helped you think and get through various aspects of teaching in remote times, and then now as we transition back to on-campus times. And I wonder about what the sustained change in either these tools, but maybe more on the instruction side, looks like. The tools are just a resource for enacting the types of instructional practices that you hope to achieve. They and them among themselves aren't the sort of thing that forces change. It's you thinking about how to support students and do that through these resources. So I'm curious, if anybody has ideas about how they plan to sustain that change, how they're thinking about their own practice through these tools moving forward.
If I can take
please, yeah,
at that. So we are always asking. I think COVID moved the rock from our feet, and a lot of what we thought was important turned out that can be replicated in many ways. So, for example, one question, right? If you have videos of all your lectures, why do the lectures? So you have to ask that question, right? So now we are able to ask all of the, we are asking all of these questions and trying to see what really makes sense, right? So we are trying to push the envelope. Now I think we have the understanding that it is worth pushing the envelope, and it is fun pushing the envelope. Having said that, I think that from 6006 is a big class, and we can only go where the students let us go. Sometimes, we try to push the students the wrong way, and they are brutal in their evaluations and in their, they voice their opinions, right? So it is a trade-off between trying to be adults that we know better than the students, but at the end, the students are the clients, and they will allow us to do certain things, and they won't allow us to do other things.
I think there's I think it's a really important point, and it's also one where we have to continue to think back. One of the advantages of my work and my background is thinking about what does the science of learning say about these pieces? How can we leverage the research to understand where we might push envelopes effectively and where we might want to defer to some of the things we're hearing from the students? And so, just to say out loud, happy to continue to have those conversations with the larger community as these pieces come up, as you raise these questions, right? So hopefully we can be a resource to help you answer them, and you don't have to necessarily do it all on your own. But I'll ask the same question to our other panelists and see if they've got responses as well.
So actually, maybe I could say a few words since I didn't present the slides. So I've actually been dealing with this question very directly with Joey, actually, as I've been continuing to teach a class for which we already created several MOOCs, and also as I'm teaching other classes where I don't have MOOCs yet, I'm thinking, what to do next, and also getting that student feedback, which actually Joey has helped a lot with. So one thing I can tell you is from at least on the MOOCs I already created, with all the time I spent, I feel like I cannot deliver the material better. So like those videos are perfect. Every time I made a mistake, we went back and we like fixed it or re-recorded, like they're perfect. And so I asked the question, like, maybe why do I even lecture? Just like, why I can't do this lecture better than this. But there is some value in actually doing it. I've talked about this with students, and you don't necessarily think about it, but at least when I lecture, I have a fair amount of interaction with the students. So people ask questions, I'm looking at them, I'm gauging the room. Are people like have glazed looks and falling asleep at their desk? Are they really engaged? I might speed up or slow down. So I feel like there's a certain interaction that does go on, even if it's not stopping the lecture, that is valuable. And the students say that they don't seem to like being told, hey, go watch these videos, and then when you come in, we'll do a flipped classroom, we'll just talk about other stuff. They feel like if the videos are important, if that's the lecture, at least the feedback we're getting now, is that they want to have that lecture, at least some significant part of it. But what we found that the students really liked from the content that we previously created and used residentially in the last 2 years is the interactive problems. So especially if you're teaching mathematics, in engineering, where there's some calculations to be done, for example, we're making a lot of progress. I think the communities make a lot of progress in how to formulate questions, but basically breaking down a big problem into little pieces, kind of scaffolding it, and then maybe giving some attempts. And if you don't get it, you get sort of some text or some image that gives you some hints. Really allows people to learn in a very interactive way, and it's much easier for them to do it themselves. So that's, I think, really helpful for outside learners, but even for our own learners, they like that. And so we use many of our MITx problems in residential teaching. On the other hand, in graduate education, I feel the residential component is really important, actually undergrad too, in terms of collaborating. So, one reason we ask open-ended questions where you don't get all little hints is so you talk to your friends and you work on the piece set together, and a lot of learning happens there. So we don't want to take that away either. And so going forward, we're having a balanced approach. For example, this year we had 3 problems every week. One at least was MITx. The other 2 were either new ones or from the book that were open-ended without any hints and any help, and the students were encouraged to work together. So that's at least my perspective.
No, I think that's really valuable. And just following up on that, I think there's an important, right? Every context is slightly different. Not all lectures are the same. Some lectures are naturally more engaged and invite action from students and co-discussion amongst students, and that looks very different than maybe other types of lecture delivery. And so we use this big umbrella term to mean to think that we mean one thing across everywhere, and that's not always the case. So I think it's important to remember that there's a balance. In your case, balancing that with the scaffolded supports now that you're offering is a way of thinking through how do we look at the whole picture collectively amongst all of these pieces. So kudos to your team for taking on the challenge of thinking through that. Krishna, I noticed your hand, and I'll open it up to you for a question, I'm assuming.
So I wanted to sort of riff on both of those answers from Mauricio and Martin. But before I do that, I'll just warn Martin and Joey that they're going to have competition from me for use of that light board in the basement of Building 26.
Yeah, that's
so
already happening. Yeah.
The email just went out, so it's, well, it's been known for a while, but it's now out in email that starting on February 1st, I'm a professor of physics, and one of my contributions to the department will be helping Peter Dermashkin and Michelle Tomasik out for 802 by recording some new and improved and better lightboard videos for 802, which is something that I contributed previously, but some of my older ones need redoing. Anyway, so you'll have competition in that basement room. But more seriously, I think we have to take apart what we mean by the word lecture. Lecture means something very different if it's lecture in a 300-person class versus the kind of lecture that Martin is referring to, which I don't know how large the class Martin's thinking of, but I'm imagining it somewhere between 20 and 50. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is we have to think about the engagement, which both of you talked about, and it's different in different contexts. But I think the reason that our students come to campus is for the engagement. Why do they come to MIT and not just watch, do things remotely from wherever they are, whether that was because of the pandemic or for any other reason? It's because of the engagement, and that word engagement also needs to be taken apart. It includes collaboration in groups of 3 learning how to solve physics problems in an 802 classroom. It includes interacting with Martin or with Mauricio, interacting with the professor in a whole variety of ways. But then you start thinking, what's the best way to create that engagement? Is it office hours or is it lecture? Well, what do I mean by lecture? When I start thinking about lecture, I should think about creating the engagement in lecture, and how you then go will be, it takes you in one direction if you're thinking about Martin's class, takes you in a completely different direction if you're thinking about 801 or 802, which Peter Dermashkin will speak about later. But I think asking what's the engagement or the magic that we're trying to create, what's the magic that really is at the core of the experience of being an MIT student, the answers will be different for first-year undergrads or PhD students, but in both cases, I think it's about engagement. So how do we create that engagement that allows a deeper kind of learning to occur than is possible without it?
And so I'm actually gonna throw that in some ways to Emma and sort of add on to it and follow up with a specific question. You sort of mentioned it in passing of the group. I know a little bit more, so that's why I'm calling it out, which is you've made the choice to not have the annotation be graded, to not have the system assign points or value to that process. And instead, I think sort of take it in and make it part of your learning community, the engagement that Krishna is talking about, where students are building a natural engagement with one another around the ideas of your course. And so I'm curious if you can say a little bit more about that decision and what that looked like and how you feel it's sort of played out in your work.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'll be honest, I didn't use the algorithmic grading the first time around when I used Perusal, just because it was my first time using it. And so I just wasn't sure how that was going to work out. But having looked at it again, I think I still am not going to be using the algorithmic grading because I felt that the engagement of the students with one another and also with me in the annotations was very authentic. They knew that they weren't going to be graded based on how many questions they asked or how many upvotes they made and things like that, because it's quite easy to game that in many ways, right? If that's your aim. But instead, they were very authentic in their participation. And I found that most of the students were very highly engaged already in the annotation process. So we didn't need that extra kind of incentive that, I'm going to give you points if you ask more than 7 questions. And one thing that came out in the student feedback on Perusal was that they really, really appreciated, I think most of all, the top thing they appreciated was a chance to read alongside their peers, to hear their peers' questions and reactions to the text and feel like they had a sense of community through that engagement with one another. They actually prized that over the ability to ask me questions through that platform. And so I think that was another really important thing that I saw through perusal that I'd like to keep going in my classes, is what the students themselves bring to the class. They're much more able to do that than when we only meet twice a week in person, because this platform kind of extends that engagement across the week. And so they're able to add a lot of different students would bring things to the table. As I mentioned, one student had a keen interest in poetry. Another student had a lot of experience with the video games. Some students had knowledge about really arcane aspects of Chinese history and things like that that they brought in. So everyone brought different things to that reading process, which was really, really enriching.
So thank you, and thank you to all. Please join me. Thank you to all of our panelists. It was an engaging conversation. I hope the community found some insights and some ideas and some new ways of thinking about their own instruction through looking at some of these tools and the way that others have sort of engaged with this. Somehow I think I'm right on time, which is a miracle. So thank you everyone for your contributions.